And at three-quarters, I looked at three-quarters through the book before I become Jean Desmond.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing that she caught that. That's why you need people to read a book. That's why you need critiquing, because they see things that you didn't see.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome. I'm Larry Singer, and we're talking with Jean Desmond about her recently published book, Look Back and Laugh. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you.
So, I'm a bit confused. Blanche Wimmer, Jean Desmond, Gigi, the matriarch. Who are you?
Well, I feel right this minute like Jean Desmond. I started out life as Blanche Wimmer, and then when I realized that people said to me, oh, you don't look like a Blanche, that wasn't such a good name. And Wimmer, I had a job where I had to introduce myself, and I'd say, I'm Miss Wimmer, blah, blah, blah. And the woman said to me, but what's that about swimming? And I said, I didn't say anything about swimming. She said, you did. When you first started talking, you said something about swimming. And I said, well, when I first started talking, I said, I'm Miss Wimmer. I realized it sounds like I'm a swimmer. I said, that name has to go. And then I wanted to be an actress, so I was 16 years old, and I made it, took up the name. Where I got it from, I have no idea, except Janine, I Dream of Lilac Time. There was a very famous song when I was a young girl. So I took Janine as the first name, and I liked the name Desmond, but I put an E on it because it was more French.
So was it pronounced Desmonde?
Yeah, Jean Desmond or whatever. And then as I got a little smarter and older and I started modeling in my late 20s, then I realized it's very hard to write the checkout to Janine Desmond, so I made it Jean Desmond. And I've been that ever since. But with marriages and everything else, I never really made it legal until 20 years ago. And then finally I got it on my passport. So I really am Jean Desmond today.
Okay. So for the purposes of this interview, you'd like me to call you Jean?
Please.
Okay. The book is called Look Back and Laugh. Where did the title come from?
Yeah, my mother used to say when I was very young and I complained about our poverty and the hardships we had, oh, someday you'll look back and laugh at this. And then after my sister committed suicide, she never said that anymore. And there's some I can look back and laugh on, but there's a lot of tragedy in the story, too. I was a little worried about Look Back and Laugh. I was afraid people would think it was a book of humor. And my family and everybody else tried. We tried dozens and dozens of other titles, and I always came back to Look Back and Laugh. And then I didn't want to call it a memoir, was I put the book on the computer, and I realized all the things I had done in my adolescence. It was not a memoir, it was actually a confession. So I changed it to Confessions of a Teen in the 30s.
Why did you write the book?
I always, after the things that happened to me in my early teens, I always had to explain to the world. I never told people, but I felt I had to explain to the world how a high school honor student could get herself into such a pickle that she wound up having an illegitimate child at the age of 15. And I always had to explain it. I think I had to explain it to myself how it happened. So I wrote the book. I actually wrote it 25 years ago. I was living in Brazil at the time, and I had to stay there for 2 months because of the bureaucracy in order to get my money out of the country. So I borrowed a typewriter, and I wrote the book then. And I'd always gotten stuck at my sister's suicide. I'd always got blocked. I couldn't go any further. And this time I forced myself to do it, and it was in the summertime, and I had to keep the windows open, and I'd sob so hard that I had to close the windows for fear the neighbors would think somebody was beating me. But I got through that part, and after that, the rest was, it wasn't easy, but it was much simpler to go past the suicide. And I was in therapy when I was 40, and I was describing the suicide to the therapist. And he said, that didn't happen 25 years ago, that's happening right now. And it was like I had to remember all these things. And then when I finally wrote the book, it was the most wonderful therapy that I could have had. I could forget about it. Now, it was written now, it was history, and I could forget it. And I would suggest anybody who has a traumatic story, put it onto a book form or short story form, because it is very therapeutic.
So instead of actually for financial gain or anything, you actually...
I just had to do it. I had the need to explain myself.
Okay. How did each of the chapters, if you want to call them chapters, are dates? How did you keep the dates straight?
Well, luckily, I got hold of a World Almanac, which has a perpetual calendar in it, and I could look up which days of the week Christmas came and Easter came, and what year they came, you know, in each year when they changed these movable feasts. And so I used that. Now, there wasn't supposed to be chapter headings. I really didn't have chapters when I wrote the book. I wrote it so that the, like a little, to break up the story, I'd put down the dates to keep track of when things happened. And then when the book was published, they put it in large headings, and I thought, that looks good, I'll leave it alone. So now it's chapter headings by dates.
Did you consult a map to get the streets down?
I tried to. It's funny, I had a friend living in New York, and I asked him to send me a map of Brooklyn so I could remember where the streets were. He sent me a map of New York City, which didn't help me at all with Brooklyn. But I remembered pretty much. Because it was all burnt into my brain, when things happen that are traumatic, when you're very young, you don't forget them. When they happen as you get older, you can smooth it off and forget it. But everything was very clear. People ask me, did I keep a journal? No, it was all in my brain.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, you have exact conversations or words, conversations with people, and they're in dialogue. Was it the exact dialogue?
It's
or was
burned
it
into my brain.
Really?
It really is.
And the letters were burned into your brain too?
Oh, well, they burned into my brain because we used them as evidence in court. So they were burned into my brain very, very strongly. Yeah. But it was wonderful because once it was written down, I could forget it. So that was good.
Were names changed in the
I
book?
changed a few names I put down to protect the survivors. Some people say I shouldn't have changed them, but I didn't change Jimmy's name because whatever happened to him, he had coming to him. And but the others, I didn't want to hurt the people. For instance, there was a man that I had an affair with for a year or more, and I knew he had a daughter, and he said he wasn't married, but I always had a suspicion that he was. And I thought, why, if she's still alive or her children are alive, why should they find out that the father or grandfather was cheating on whoever he was cheating on? So I changed his name. I changed a few. I didn't want to hurt the survivors.
Okay.
Everybody's dead except me.
Do you wish that you hadn't protected some people?
No.
No?
No, I'm happy with everything that I did.
Okay. Now you mentioned Jimmy. Do you want to tell who he is?
Well, he was the man when I was 14 years old who pretended he loved me and he was going to marry me, and he fooled me. I can't even say how, unless you read the book, but he raped me. He got me in a position where he could rape me, and then he kept promising he was going to marry me, and he kept promising it. And I was at 14 years old. I was so desperate to get out of the environment that I was in that I believed him. And then after I was pregnant, a woman came to the door with 2 little children and said, I'm Jimmy's wife. And it turned out he had a wife and 4 or 5 children. And then I never saw him again after that, except he got in. When my mother found out at the 5th month that I was pregnant that I was going to have a baby, she knew right away it was he. And she took me to children's court. And then they went after him, and he wound up getting 3 years in prison for, at that time it was called, I forgot now, rape, but it was called rape, but because of my age. He was 35, and I was 14.
Was it hard writing the book with recognizable people in the book? Your daughter, people that are relatives of people in the book?
No, June is my daughter. She was the result of that rape. And she knew about it. When I was living in Brazil, she was back in the States, and I would send her chapters, and we didn't have computers in those years, so it all went by mail, and she was helping me to write the book, actually doing the proofing and the editing for me. So she knew all about the fact that I was going to write the book, and she doesn't care, which is very nice, because in those years, an illegitimate child was considered a terrible disgrace. And it bothered her for a long time, and of course, she was raised as my sister. And it wasn't until she was in her late 20s that I finally decided it was time to tell her. And it was very traumatic for her. But she likes the book. She's happy with it.
Was there anything that you may have left out of the book?
Well, you can't put in everything that happens from day to day. As it is, it turns out to be over 400 pages, and it's just the first 20 years of my life. If I'd put in every little detail that ever happened, it would have been over 1,000 pages. But I put in the important things that happened.
Okay. The dedication at the beginning, your choice of words, to Junie with prayer for charity and forgiveness. Have all your other attempts at apologies gone unnoticed?
Oh, absolutely. And what I wanted to put there, but I decided it's a little late, forgiveness for yourself also, because she's still terribly upset about the fact that she didn't know until she was almost 30 that I was her mother, and that she found out about it so late, and she had to change all her thinking about the family and the relationship. So she still holds a lot of bitterness, and that I feel very bad about.
Have you found out if the apology's been accepted?
Well, we're still close. She moved far away to Florida, and I'm in Los Angeles, but we're close in the email, and we write back and forth almost every day. So she hasn't really accepted my apology, But she says to me recently that she knows she's got a love-hate relationship with me, and that's sad. For her. It's also sad for me, but it's worse for her because she's the one that's doing the hating, and that hurts her.
Now that the book is published, how do you feel?
I'm very proud of it. It's very funny because I've told people for quite a while, I belong to a writer's club, and I've told people I've written a book, and when I brought the book in to show, that's your book? And they were so impressed, and I'm impressed too. So I'm very proud of it. It's like when I sent it off to the publisher, it was as if I was sending my child away. You know, it was my baby, and I couldn't do any more changes. That was it. So, but I'm proud of it.
Do you feel there's more stories to tell?
Oh, I've got many more. This is only the first 20 years of my life. Then I have from the 30s, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and I'm 81 years old now. And I'm going to write books until I'm 100, and then I'm going to die. So that's my ambition in life. I'm going to get everything out to the very end. And there are a lot more stories to tell.
Well, from the opening sentence in the book through the whole to the end, I could visualize a movie taking place.
Thank you.
Do you have any plans?
I would love it. If
Would
anybody who
you-
sees this wants to make me an offer, I'm ready.
Do you visualize who you'd like to play characters in the
Years
in the
ago,
movie?
I would have liked to have Jodie Foster play me as a young girl because I seem to identify with her. And Jimmy, I always see Jack Nicholson because I hate him. And my father, oh no, and today Jack Nicholson could play my father. But Jimmy, at the moment, I can't think who would play Jimmy. Got any ideas?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Well, the world that you wrote about was totally different from the world that we live in today.
Tremendously. That's why in the foreword I had to explain things like when we call somebody feeble-minded or a moron, today you would say, what, developmentally disabled? No, no. And then, in fact, my grandchildren were complaining about my politically incorrect language. But that's the way we spoke in those years, and it was accepted.
And you gave a disclaimer at the beginning.
Yeah, well, that's why I had to do it, to let them know that we call black people colored. If you'd call a black person black in those years, they would say, how dare you? Because many of them are not black. They're quite fair. And so I had to use words that we use. We don't use colored anymore for African Americans. But then in those years we did. That was a polite word to call them, to say the colored people.
Okay. What are your thoughts and feelings about the world that we live in today?
In some ways it's improved. For instance, the fact that illegitimate children are accepted, that people living together without marriage are accepted. But in many other ways it's much worse, because in those years when I worked in the dance hall and came home at 4 o'clock in the morning on the subway, I never had to worry about anybody stealing my purse, snatching a purse, or beating me up or raping me. But today, you wouldn't go in the subway at 4 o'clock in the morning unless you had people to protect you. And the streets, like Johnny got killed in the book. The manager of the dance hall was shot almost in front of me. And there was gangsters that did it, but the gangsters used to shoot each other. They didn't shoot, and he was related to gangsters. That's why he got shot. They couldn't get the gangsters, so they got Johnny. But today, the shooting, you can't walk down the street without worrying. You ride in a car, you make sure your doors are locked and your windows are closed. So it was a much safer world in those years, even in the heart of New York City.
What can we learn about the world of yesteryear?
What can we learn? Well, we can learn to be more tolerant of people, which we are today. We can learn to be more tolerant of relationships. We can learn to appreciate what we have, because there's so much we didn't have. And there was so much poverty. That was during the Depression. And I didn't realize that I joined a writers group called How to Write Your Life Story just in the last few months. And I hear everybody reading their stories, and they all went through pretty much what I did as far as poverty is concerned. So there was a tremendous amount of poverty. Today we have most of the country, thank God and thank heaven, is not prosperous but well off. You know, almost everybody's got a television set and a telephone and electricity and running water and toilets. And in those years, so many people didn't have that and didn't have any hope of having it. That's why my sister committed suicide. She had no hope. She saw us always living in that terrible poverty. And she gave up. And I didn't give up, and here I am.
There you are. What is the single most important factor that you would say that makes you who you are today?
I would probably credit my mother, even though she put me down and her idea of me was insisted I finish high school, which never did me any good. I've gotten where I am even without high school because I'm a reader, so I learned how to write from that. The fact that everybody tried to discourage me from what I wanted to do, I don't know where the strength comes from, except I'm Taurus the bull. Maybe that's why. But everybody tried to discourage me. You'll never be a model. You'll never be an actress. And you ruined your life. And you marry me because I'm the only one who wants you. And really, I don't know where I got the strength from. I'm very, very fortunate.
So it was kind of paradoxical effect. They're putting you down made you stronger.
I think so.
I mean, it's almost Nietzschean in a way.
Yeah.
What does not kill me only makes me stronger.
Yes, that's the way it worked for me. I'm very fortunate.
Okay.
It wasn't intentional on my part.
Mm-hmm.
Just luck.
Well, tell me, what would be the one story in the book? There's many stories in the book, many different chapters and entries in the book. What would be the one story that you'd call your favorite?
I like the fact about the Chinese alacqua flower, where I was 13 years old, and I was working with these pitchmen on the street that were cheating everybody that they could. And what they did was buy seeds in Chinatown that looked like bull's horns, and they punched holes in them. They showed me how to do it. I was helping them. And they went to the Prospect Park, and they cut down a lot of twigs. They almost got caught by the cops, too. And they cut the twigs short, and they pushed them. They put them in glue, and then they pasted them into the seeds so they looked like the twigs were growing out. And they bought a rose for $1 or so in a florist shop, put it in a mason jar with water and put the top on, and they claimed that those seeds were going to grow that beautiful rose. And then we went out to Coney Island, and we cheated, I don't know how many hundreds of people walking along the boardwalk, and I was the shill. I didn't do the selling. A shill is a person who gets the people started to buying. When they say, now, who wants one of these? You say, I'll take one, and then all the suckers come along, and they say, oh, she's buying it, then I'll buy one, too. And I got paid $2 a day for doing that, and I thought that was a funny story.
What was the hardest story for you to write?
About my
what was the
sister's-
saddest?
My sister's suicide.
Yeah.
And the part where I was in the hospital having the baby, and my mother said, I said, how will I let you know when I have the baby? She said, send me a postcard. And that was so cold, that always stayed in my mind. That she didn't care. I was there all alone having the baby. You're going to make me cry, right? I said he was going to do a Barbara Walters, right? And having the baby with nobody there, and I didn't realize why the nurses were so unfunny to me. That's because they knew that I was an unwed mother. And even the nurses in the hospital, it was cold as could be, and it was a very hard time. I was just 15, just turned 15. So that was hard too. And hard to write about and hard to live through.
Do you have much of a memory of Gertrude?
Well, we were never good friends because she was 4.5 years older. And we started to get friendly. When she killed herself, it was her 18th and a half birthday. And the strange thing is, I never realized till lately, the reason in our family we celebrate half birthdays, it was because she died on her half birthday. And she was 18 and a half, and I had just turned 14. And so we were beginning now to exchange clothing. But even then, we still didn't get along. She used to pull my hair when I was young. We used to sleep in bed together, and my mother had us separated. She was always pulling my hair. So we really never got to be friendly. It's sad, because I had a fight with her just before she killed herself. So that gave me a lot of guilt, too.
There was the one story in the book about you actually pulling out your hair.
Oh, that was terrible.
Physically. Yeah.
Yeah, when I went to when my mother took me to the it was called the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, and there was a lot of cruelty to the children there. And the first thing they did out of stupidity, lack of sophistication, lack of knowledge. They put me in a room all by myself in a locked room with a window that looked out onto school playground across the street. And here I was, my mother had just found out I was pregnant, so I was under tremendous stress. And they locked me in the room for a week, all by myself with nothing to read. When I asked them, could I have something to read? Could I have a newspaper? Oh, wait, you're not allowed to have newspapers. Well, could I have something to read, a book? And all they could find for me was a little book that I'd read when I was 6 years old, and here I was 14 already. And it was very hard on me. So I sat there. I didn't know what to do. You know, they brought me my meals. They took me out to go to the bathroom, back to the locked room again. And I didn't know what was going to happen. And I sat there and I started to pull the hair out of my arms. And then when I got rid of all the hair out of my arms, then I started to pull the hair out of my head. And I didn't find out until just recently that that's an actual syndrome that people under stress sometimes do.
Trichotillomania, I think it is.
Yeah, I wrote it in the book, but I can't remember it. But it was very hard on me then. And then they took me out of that room. They said, oh, we're going to get you a roommate. And they put me in the room next door with a see, that's where we use the word feeble-minded. Today we wouldn't say that. But she was feeble-minded, the poor girl. She was 16 years old, pregnant. Her cousin got her pregnant, and she couldn't read. And they were going to send us to school in the society there. And she kept begging me to teach her how to read. And I tried to teach her how to read. And I didn't realize for a few days that she'd never learned how to read because she was feeble-minded, that poor kid. So that was a hard time.
Who's your intended audience?
Well, it's funny because I have a great-granddaughter named Lindley, and she wanted a copy of the book to take to school and show and tell. So I said, well, I'll send you a copy, and I did. And then I found out she's reading it, and she's 12 years old. But I figured, well, it's sex education for her. Better that she should learn now. Because I had no knowledge. That's why I got into trouble. I didn't know where babies came from. I didn't know how they got there. That was a very, very important reason that I got into trouble. So I would just assume this child would learn young about sex and how to protect herself when she needs to.
So that's the audience that should read this book is...
I think it's good for anybody. I try to write it simply. In the beginning, I try to write it the way a 14-year-old girl would write it, very unsophisticated. And then as I got older and a lot more sophisticated, then I wrote a little more as an adult. So and almost anybody can read it. People say it's such an easy read.
Now, Junie's father, Jimmy Tadlock, he skipped out after she was born, right?
No, long before.
Long before she was born.
As soon as he found out I was pregnant, the sad thing there is, as soon as he found out I was pregnant, he said, oh, don't worry about it, I'm going to take care of you. And he gave me some pills to take. And I didn't know at the time he was married, but I was getting very suspicious of him, and I took the pills home with me, and they looked at them, they had a big A on them. I said, well, maybe they're just aspirin, but maybe they're poison. So I wrote a note to the family, to whom it may concern, that if you find me dead, that Jimmy did it, that he gave me poison. And I put it under my pillow, but they didn't poison me, they didn't kill me, but they didn't cause an abortion either, so a miscarriage. So they were probably just aspirin.
Over the years, have you played out what you would say to him if you ever encountered him again?
I can't say it on the air.
You could censor yourself.
When I was having problems with Junie in later years, when she was growing up, and she was really a problem, that poor kid, I used to think, gee, if I met him someplace, I'd make believe that he never saw me before, and I'd get him to a hotel someplace, and I'd seduce him, but I won't tell you what I would do to him. But I could have done, I wouldn't kill him, but I'd do worse, I think.
You read a lot of books.
Well, since I'm writing, I haven't got that much time to read.
Well, but you have read a lot of books. You're in the Great Books Club.
I belong to a Great Books discussion group.
What author do you associate with, or not associate with, but identify with?
Yeah, well, recently it's Frank McCourt and Angela's Ashes, because his story is so much like mine, except that it's in Ireland, but the poverty, I can relate to all of that, so I relate very strongly to Frank McCourt.
Okay, any other authors that you've...
In old days, I used to love Sinclair Lewis. I used a lot of the authors that we read in great books. A lot of them. And of course, we go back to Aristotle and Socrates and all of that, which I enjoy.
You have a few rules for writing books that you've talked about. Do you want to share them with
Well,
us?
the first rule is learn how to write, because there's so many people, especially, probably shouldn't say this on the air, especially in some of the writing classes I've been where they read their work, and their work is so badly written. They use a lot of adverbs. They don't use dialogue. Dialogue is extremely important to put in a book because it makes it come to life. You get so that you can almost visualize the people from what they're saying. So that's very important. Leave the adverbs out. Put the angrily or hastily or bitterly, put it into the dialogue. Let the dialogue speak for itself. And also, I feel very strongly, if you want to write it all today professionally, you must have a computer. You cannot do it without a computer. You cannot write and move things around and change the words. In fact, one time the computer said to me, you know, you changed this 37 times. And I said, who asked you? I kept right on changing whatever I wanted to change, whether it was one word or a whole paragraph or a whole chapter. And it's so good to do, because I started out naturally with a manual. I graduated to an electric. And then with the computer, I started about 12 years ago with a Macintosh, and now I'm on a PC. And I love the computer. When it does what I tell it to.
Okay.
The rest of I could kill it.
So technology's really helped out in writing your book.
Extremely. I don't know how anybody could be a writer without it. These people that write longhand, even that, I mean, even a manual typewriter's better than that.
You want to tell your story about Ray Bradbury?
Yeah, I belong to the Southwest Manuscripters, and Ray Bradbury comes once a year to talk to us. And a couple of years ago, he came, and he said, you know, he said, I finally got rid of my manual, and I bought an electric typewriter. And he was so proud of himself. He's a wonderful man. Everybody loves him. And one of the members of the club said, but Ray, you know, it's so much better if you use a computer. You know, with the computer, you can cut and paste. You can move whole paragraphs around. And Ray said, I don't move paragraphs. That was a big laugh. And now the funny thing is he tells the story on himself. I move paragraphs. I move everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was one tip or one rule for aspiring authors. You had some more rules?
No, I can't remember them now. You should have
Okay.
told me bring my notes. I'm doing seminars, and I tell people what they should do, and then learn how to write. Join clubs like my Writers Club, because it's all networking. It's people helping each other. Without the Writers Club, I never would have written this book, because the people in the club helped me. Some of the things in here won prizes in the article contests. And so the Writers Club has helped me. I now belong to a critiquing group, and they're helping me. They're very professional. So you really can't work in a vacuum. You really need people to help you and to help them. You have to help them. It's two ways.
All right. All right, Jean, we're going to wind this up, but I just want to ask you one final question. Do you have any regrets?
I don't have regrets, even though it was a very hard time. I'm grateful for the fact that I've got all my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I got 5 great-grandchildren, 7 grandchildren, 3 daughters, all their husbands, all the spouses, and I'm very happy for my family. I'm very fortunate. I'm very proud of them.
All right. Well, thank you for watching. We've been discussing Look Back and Laugh with Jean Desmond. My name is Larry Singer. Thanks, Jean.
Thank you.